All right, we'll talk about day three of our 5 days. We're going to talk about the war in Europe and Africa, part 2. What is this a picture of over here?
D-Day.
D-Day. D-Day. How many guys have seen Saving Private Ryan? They have said that was pretty accurate, except for the beach. In the movie was about 100 yards they had to get to the hill. In real life, it was about 300 yards. And the hill that they had to climb to the top of was about twice as high in real life than it was in Private Ryan. Kind of gives you an understanding of how big it was. They also said that more people died training for D-Day than actually died at D-Day. I don't know if that's true or not, but I got it from somebody. It's a cool fact. What are these things here?
Those boats that they
Up in the air.
Oh,
They're little blips. Why do they have little blips? They're not advertising at D-Day. Thank you. And that's recorded, so everybody will hear that.
Drop bombs on the ships.
whoa.
Tatum Thompson. There's no bombs. They're actually tethered by steel cables. So if a plane was coming in to dive bomb at it, it would hit those cables and the plane would wreck before it hit the boat. Fun fact, huh? All right. So 1941 was when the United States entered the war after the bombing where? Pearl Harbor, right? And Stalin, Germany had already broken that Soviet-Nazi pact, right? That we talked about, the non-aggression pact. And so Germany was fighting a front right here. They were fighting a war against the Soviet Union. Remember, Stalin was an ally. He was on our side. He was on the side of Great Britain, right? Well, Stalin wanted the Allies to open a Western front, start war over here, have a big invasion here, so that Germany would have to split up their army, because all of their army's on the east now. Okay, Great Britain, who's the only ally kind of surviving in Europe, didn't care if Germany took over the Soviet Union. Churchill didn't like Stalin. England didn't like the Soviet Union. So he didn't really care. So he wasn't doing much. Stalin wanted the USA to say, hey, to really push for that second front. But the United States just entered the war. England was in charge. Churchill was in charge of the strategy, basically. So Stalin was upset. We decided to focus south and get rid of the Axis powers in North Africa, because of concern was more of the oil fields. The oil fields were more important to us than Stalin wanting us to fight a Western front. So we started in the south, in North Africa. We eventually we defeat Germany at the Battle of El Alamein in 1942, and then pushed Nazi Germany out of North Africa. We invade Sicily in 43, which is right here, and then we move up through Italy, taking over Rome in 44. So now, a couple of years in, we're starting to get the momentum and kind of have the Axis powers kind of back on their heels. In 45, Mussolini was captured and executed by the Italian resistance. The Italian resistance were the Italian people, the Italian soldiers that didn't conform to Mussolini or the Axis powers. They were always fighting against Mussolini. This is Mussolini dead and his mistress. They killed her too. Strung him up in a public square. Meanwhile, the Soviet army was able to stop the German push at Moscow and at Leningrad in 1942. I will email you this PowerPoint as well. I don't think I have yet. So if you're behind on notes, if you're falling behind, I will send those to you. The big battle was the Soviets defeating the German army at the Battle of Stalingrad. That was huge. Huge. Again, if you don't get this all written down, don't panic. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad was one of the major turning points of the war because the Russians were able to start pushing Germany back towards Germany, the German army, the Nazis back towards Germany, out of the east by 1943. Again, you can shorthand that. It doesn't have to be word for word, but you should be writing something. In 1943, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill met in Tehran, which is in Iran, to kind of coordinate a plan to defeat Germany. Stalin's on the left, Franklin Roosevelt in the middle, Churchill on the right. The big three agreed to open a second front. Now this is where they decided that we're going to go ahead and come in through France, D-Day, all of that. A second front to divide the German army. Remember, the Germans are still fighting the Russian or the Soviets in the east. And the Allies decided to open that Western Front by invading France. Remember, France was under German control at this time. Operation Overlord, one of the coolest names, I think, also known as D-Day. June of 1944 was the largest land and sea attack in the history of the world up to that point. The Germans thought that we were going to attack at the Strait of Dover. We had leaked plans about an attack there, so that's where most of the German forces were waiting for us. There were some in Normandy, but not near the numbers that that were needed to stop the Allies. The Normandy invasion was deadly, but the Allied victory created the Western Front that we were talking about. So now the Germans are going to have to fight on the east against the Soviets and the west against the rest of the Allies. This allowed the Allies to push towards Germany from the west. At the same time, the Soviets were pushing from the east. Forced to fight a two-front war, Hitler ordered a huge offensive, a counterattack at the Battle of the Bulge. That was Hitler's last big chance to keep winning, but he lost. The Allies were able to stop the counteroffensive. Yes, sir. It was still 44, I believe. 44 to 45 was that counteroffensive. Late 44, early 45. By March of 45, the Allies were actually in Germany and pushing towards Berlin. In February, the big three met again in Yalta to create a plan for Europe after the war was over. So now you have Churchill on the left, Roosevelt in the middle, Stalin on the right. Look at Roosevelt there in February of 45. And here he is in 43. He aged a ton in those 2 years. He had polio as a child, and he was really struggled with his health. He's going to die a few months after this. He's not the president that ended World War II. He's going to die, and Truman will take over. But he was the guy that was elected president from in 1932. And he was president all the way through 45. He was the only president elected 4 times. There wasn't a 2-term rule back then. Stalin agreed to send troops to help the United States invade Japan. They agreed to allow self-determination or free elections for the nations that were freed from Nazi rule. This is where we're going to start to get into the Soviets versus the Americans in the Cold War. We didn't want communism to spread. The Soviets wanted communism to spread. They agreed to kind of divvy up and occupy Germany after the war until Germany got back on its feet. But because of the Cold War, the Soviets wanted to control Germany. We wanted it to be a democracy, and Germany ends up getting split into 2 countries, East Germany and West Germany. When I was growing up, all I knew was 2 Germanys. There wasn't, it was 2 separate countries for up until early 1990s was when they reunified. So like during the Olympics and all of that, it was always East Germans versus West Germans. Like it was 2 separate, complete countries. Interesting. There was a wall right through the middle of Berlin, and if you lived on one side, you were part of East Germany. If you lived on the other side, you were part of West Germany. They also agreed at Yalta to create and join a League of Nations. I mean, United Nations. The UN is still a thing today where you try to get together and solve all your problems before it gets to war.